Hey guys, in this video we'll be discussing the Ionic framework. So let's take a look at what Ionic is and how it works. So Ionic is an open source HTML5 mobile app development framework, and it's targeted at building hybrid mobile apps. Okay, as we talked about earlier in the course, a hybrid app is basically a web app that runs inside of a native container or a web view. Okay, so you can think of Ionic as the front-end UI framework that handles all of the look and the feel and the UI interactions that your application needs in order to be compelling. Now, since Ionic is just an HTML5 framework, it does need some kind of native wrapper, and that's where Cordova or PhoneGap comes in. Cordova allows web apps and websites to be run inside of a web view to seem like they're a real native app. Okay, so we'll need to have that installed on our system as well. Now, unlike just a regular responsive framework, Ionic comes with a native styled UI elements and layouts that you would typically find with a native iOS or Android SDK. Okay, so they look and feel like a real native app as opposed to just a mobile website. And having these elements replaces the need to use something like jQuery Mobile or Twitter Bootstrap or some other framework. Alright, Ionic was created to build hybrid apps, not mobile websites. So while they can be served in the browser, that's not what they're meant for. Okay, they were meant to run on mobile devices. Alright, now under the hood, Ionic uses the Angular framework, which is a JavaScript client-side framework, which is extremely popular. Now, it is possible to use Ionic with just the CSS portion, but it's highly recommended to use the Angular framework as it's very powerful and it keeps our code organized. There's two versions of Angular right now. We have Angular JS as well as Angular 2. And Ionic also has two versions, Ionic, which uses Angular JS, and then Ionic 2, which uses Angular 2, and we'll be working with both of those versions. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the requirements and specifications needed for Ionic. So it's recommended that you build for iOS 7 Plus or Android 4.1 Plus. Alright, and on your development environment you should have the Android SDK installed, whether you're on Windows or Mac or Linux, and then Xcode installed on Mac OS X. So Ionic itself is cross-platform. You can develop on any machine, but to test and deploy iOS apps, you'll need to be on a Mac running OS X. You'll also need a developer key to publish iOS apps, and that will run you about, I think it's $100. Android is much easier in that aspect, so we'll be working mostly on Windows with Android. You'll also need Node.js installed, which is a JavaScript runtime. Node comes with something called NPM, which is the Node Package Manager, and we need that to install Ionic as well as Cordova, so you will need to download Node.js. Alright, now if you're on Windows, you should also download and install Git with the Git Bash command line tool. This is much better than the standard Windows command line program, and I'll show you how to get that installed and set up as well. Alright, so installing and setting up Ionic is pretty easy. First of all, we have to install Cordova, so we're using npm. We just say npm install. This -g here means global, meaning we want to install it so that we can access Cordova from anywhere. Okay, once we do that, we can install Ionic with npm install -g Ionic, and then to generate our application, we can use Ionic start and then whatever we want to call our application. And there's also different templates we can use as well. In this case, we're using the blank template. Alright, and if you want to create an Ionic 2 application, you can do the same command. You just need to add this --v2 at the end, and that'll create an Ionic 2 application that uses Angular 2. Okay, now running an Ionic application, there's a few different ways to do it. We could do Ionic serve, which would run it inside of a browser right on our computer. And then if we want to run it on, let's say, an iOS simulator, we would have to add iOS as a platform with this command here, Ionic platform add iOS. If we want to add Android, we can do add Android. And then when we want to actually run in the simulator, we can do Ionic run iOS, or if we want to run it in the Android virtual device, we can do Ionic run Android. Now, when we're ready to publish our application, we can go ahead and we can run the command Cordova build release and then whatever the system, in this case Android, and this will create an unsigned APK. Alright, now we need to sign the APK just to pretty much let the user know that the code hasn't been tampered with and the code is genuine and so on. So we need a private key to be able to do that, and we can use the key tool command to generate a private key. So key tool, and then we need to do all this stuff. And then to sign it, we need to use the jar signer, which is part of the JDK, and that will sign it. And then finally, we need to run the zip align command to optimize the APK. Okay, so we'll take the unsigned APK name, which is this hello world release unsigned, and then whatever we want to call it for the final, basically the final version, which will be hello world.apk. Okay, and then you can proceed to deal with the app stores, whether it's Google or the iOS App Store. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video, and I'll see you in the next.